Welcome to day 5 of our series on in Cyber Week Scotland. And today I have the absolute honor of having two guests in the studio today. The first guest up is Federico Cherosky, and the second one we'll have as Mark, but we'll have this as a roundtable discussion as we go through. So today's topics are going to be if I am looking for a new job and I want to go work for somebody in cyber, what do certain companies do? And we've chosen both Fedi and Mark because they are kind of like the opposite ends of the spectrum, so, and they try and cover everything in between. So if we can get to Federico and just can you introduce yourselves, tell us what your company does, and yeah, let's
Sure
go.
thing. Thanks, Gary, for having me. I'm Federico Jarosky. I'm the founder and CEO of Quorum Cyber. The idea of Quorum Cyber is we're a cybersecurity firm. We focus on being able to help customers defend themselves against cyber threats so that they can continue operating confidently. We do a whole range of portfolio products, and I think that's accomplishing that mission is not simple, right? So there's a whole range of portfolios from managed services where we do the SOC and the managed detect and response service. We're really big partners of Microsoft, so a lot of what we do is in articulating the Microsoft ecosystem to accomplish that mission. But you go all the way from there to the professional services where we have teams of pen testers, red teamers, we do source code review, threat modeling. We work a lot with MITRE, attack frameworks, and ultimately the advisory team, which does the kind of higher level risk understanding, strategy building, gap analysis. So yeah, as you said, it's quite a wide range of products and services, which also lends itself well to the conversation because you can deliver that with quite an eclectic team, from really experienced people with 25 years experience or more to somebody just fresh out of college, for example. So we have quite a wide varied talent pool that I think hopefully can contribute to the chat.
Okay, fantastic. Mark.
Yeah, so I'm a technical director at MT Networks. We're a managed IT and cybersecurity provider based in Scotland but operating throughout the UK. Uh, on the IT side, of course, IT and cyber cross, but with IT being more of the everyday aspect of running your business through technology, whether that be support, whether it be hardware, software, network infrastructure, cloud services, connectivity, everything that you need to run your business, really. And of course, all of that's IT, all of it's digital, and all of it has a security implication. Hence, we have quite a strong security stack in the services that we provide to these organisations, but probably a different approach from Federico's points about Quorum. So yeah, quite a good mix and blend.
Okay. So and and the reason why we've well, I've asked you guys to be on today is exactly to talk about these kind of things because when somebody starts off looking for a new job or a new career or anything else, they often think, what am I going to do? What am I good at? And what is it that I really want to do? So um, so if I'm looking to be a security person, I would expect that the security person need to be or need to have a quite a strong technical background in terms of how things work, how networks work, and and just how the components fit together.
Hmm.
So, Mark, what sort of components do you think it needs to fit together as a skills part?
Yeah. So for me, and what we do at M3, and it's not necessarily typical of the whole IT industry, but for me, it's about customer service. It's about actually having people skills, soft skills, emotional intelligence, all the things that human beings kind of relate to. Humans don't relate to computers, they relate to people. Computers are just a tool, and the security of that, well, the security aspect comes from the back of that. So 100% looking into the softer skills which are imperative, as well as professionalism. Of course, that is it's not exactly the same, and then thereafter technical skills, strong I would say anyone trying to get into IT or into cybersecurity, of course, any technical skills are beneficial. But I would say what's even more important than that is problem-solving skills. Your attitude to wanting to uh, chase down problems, right? And those skills actually cross very well with cyber, especially when you need to be like a dog with a bone, right? When you're trying to work on a SOC and you're tracking things down. Um, so yeah, it's not necessarily that you need to come always with, your badges, your MCSAs, your CCNAs, your CompTIA certs, right? I mean, you have to have the raw skills behind that.
Federico, what's your take on?
Yeah, yeah, no, completely agree. I think Mark nailed it in the head. It's technical skills have a place, right? And technical competence has a place. What you need to make, what we try to do, and I think it's exactly the same as Mark was just alluding to. You look at a person in a 360 degree. So depending on what role he has, well, not every role is created equal, right? So if you're looking for a senior incident responder type person, it's not the same as a junior consultant. So once you understand what you're trying to get out of the role and what capabilities you want a person to bring to the team, you need to start assessing somebody 360 to look for competence, to look for experience, if you're looking for some, as well as the soft skills. I completely agree with Mark. It's not, certifications are a variable, right? And they're a sensor that indicates something, but it's not a goal in itself. It just gives you a piece of data about a person. The same way as to whether they have a degree or not, the same way as to whether they have experience or not. We find a lot, for example, we work a lot with people that come over from the services, the armed forces, and there's a lot of transferable skills. So one of the things we normally tell to everybody applying for jobs is just because you haven't done the job before, don't think that you're not a good fit for the role. A lot of the roles we have are new. These roles don't exist or haven't existed before. So we're not expecting somebody to have 10 years of experience threat hunting, maybe. But if you're curious, if you're a team player, and if you've been working in somewhere where the answer wasn't obvious, you might have 80% of the right capabilities to do the job. We just need a bit of top and tail. So.
Yeah, and I think that is quite important, especially for folks that are pondering, getting into all of this, because there's a lot of either self-doubt in terms of, am I going to be good enough for this role? And I think you need to sort of play at your own strengths in terms of what it is I want to go for. If I know that I'm really good at tasks to try and hunt them down and get to the bottom of something, yeah, that's fantastic. There's loads of opportunity for things like that, but there's also the curiosity of how things work and how they fit in together. And those kind of experiences are coming from, what have I done in my previous life? How do I, how can I apply this? Because I've had quite a few career changes, and I'm pretty sure you guys have had quite a few career changes. You didn't start off in cyber, so I certainly.
Well, it's interesting. I kind of did, which is funny. But the thing is, cyber has changed so much from when I started. Half of the roles that I'm working with today didn't exist. So when I'm talking to university students, for example, one of the things I say is, don't worry, the job that you want doesn't exist. You'll need to go out there and create it. So there's no point in stressing so much about what are companies looking for today, because that might be completely irrelevant a year down the line, depending on what new skill or new team or new function you're trying to build. So, and what I've discovered in the years of hiring that I've now had is most people are completely clueless as to what they're good at. So when you're talking about that, know which skills you're great so that you know how to transfer that, that's great. But the reality is most people have no idea what they're good at and what they're really, really, truly good at. It takes a good mentor, it takes a good team or a good boss to have actually work with you to articulate that in a healthy, constructive way where they went, look, you're really great at these things, you're really terrible at these things we need to develop in, and you just don't even try with these ones over here. And so I think a good mentor or a good first boss is probably one of the most key influential things that you can have in order of having a good career afterwards, more than whatever technical skill is. Again, it's the same as point as Mark.
Okay. So Mark, in terms of these kind of technical skills and being management or managing somebody, obviously COVID has changed the way we kind of do things, the way we approach stuff, how businesses now fit together and able to do their kind of things. So what kind of new things have you noticed over the last year that, although there were skills, what skills that people have to sort of really bring to the front?
Technical skills, yeah. Well, firstly, to the point that Federico just made a moment ago about your first manager being extremely important in your career and about you not understanding your skills that you have, I agree with that 100%. And I think for me, when someone's interviewing, the more questions they ask, the more they're taking themselves seriously and their prospects and how they're going to develop is a really big indicator whether or not they're the right person. Because it unveils the fact that they see beyond the role. Like Federico says, the roles that we've worked in before, they don't exist anymore, and the ones we're in today may well cease to exist in the future when something new comes along, right? So it shows a mindset. So I just wanted to touch on that point. On the point about security, about technical skills, I would say we're seeing a lot, particularly in the Microsoft space, an enormous shift to cloud services. Right? So whereas before, a few years ago, when engineers were applying for roles, they would have been looking, you'd have been looking at, can they work with servers, can they work with endpoints, can they work with network infrastructure, a lot of the core things. But now, with Microsoft changing the certification paths, they're dropping a lot of the old certs, a lot of the new, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, software as a service models that are now really starting to mature and to come to the mainstream, looking for people who not only know how to use it. I think back in a few years ago, it would have been acceptable that someone had those core skills and they had some exposure to the cloud. Now it's becoming much more cloud first, right? And as we start to move over the next 2-3 years, I think that's just going to become more and more important that they have a strong understanding of cloud, not just cloud technology, but cloud concepts for a start. Then, of course, the technologies, and then working knowledge on how to use those, and how they interoperate between other services, which again touches the security space.
So Federico, just how important is it that now that we're moving into the space of being in cloud and everything else, how important is it that we really, really have to focus our security footprint or our exposure to that? Because now the stuff is not on our own network anymore; it is now somewhere else. What
So I
kind of
think
things?
there's a couple of things to unpack there. So I totally couldn't acknowledge I think some principles don't change, right? So first principles are usually the same, which is what is it that we're trying to achieve? We're trying to enable businesses to innovate quicker in a defensible, secure way. So you need to start. My advice is usually start from that. What is it that you're trying to achieve? So you will have to dominate a whole bunch of technical fields. And some of those fields are completely new. Software-defined networking is completely new compared to what physical networking was. So you will have to apply skills in a particular way, but the outcomes are still the same. You're trying to use technology to empower organizations to do more, better, quicker, faster. So what you need to do is adapt, or what I recommend usually is think of adapting your strategies based on what those technologies give you. And those technologies give you both opportunities and new risks. So you need to have a very clear understanding of what is the risk surface that new technology, whatever that technology is, brings. In the example of cloud that you mentioned, for example, perimeter is completely obsolete as a concept, right? There's no longer the firewalls and the proxies and all that stuff that we have. We talk about maybe identity being the new perimeter. That is where your boundaries are now. Whatever that security of the identity happens, that's when anybody can get in through, right? So some of the fundamental principles of what's exposed and what you need to protect might change, but the outcomes don't. So as long as you have a good control of risk and you can translate risks to threats and then the controls that you require to mitigate against those, you are okay. But that's the same formula we were using before. It just requires a different collection of ingredients at the end.
Well, that's a really good analogy. So, Mark, so these kind of ingredients and so on, what sort of services are we actually talking about here in terms of where folks are moving their infrastructure on online from a service provider kind of way? What kind of things, if I was to move my stuff, what should I look out for? or should I try and attempt this to myself?
Yeah, so the specific services I would say that are mainstream, Federico touches on identity there. That's really important, right? We're seeing. I was having this conversation with somebody a few days ago actually about federation, federated services, and how several years ago we were talking about how single sign-on was going to be the big thing, but it didn't quite happen, right? But what seemed to happen was, these 6-digit codes you got to punch in everywhere, MFA. Between MFA and the federation of authentication across multiple platforms, you think, Google, Facebook, so on and so forth. Think about how many products nowadays you can log into through somebody else's identity, identity service. And as Federico was saying, that kind of becomes your perimeter, because if that gets breached, that is the way into everything else. Now, granted, a lot of it's been done by really large organizations, but then now you see why things like GDPR and information security, around who controls these services become so important, and how well they protect them. In terms of what people, engineers, people who want to get into the IT and security space would study, I would say, I still think really Microsoft are probably the authoritative source when it comes to certifications in that area. A lot of the cloud services, if you've done a certified administrator course, even from back in 2008, they were already touching on federation services back then when Microsoft developed ADFS. It's gone through iterations and it's just become bigger and bigger. So that technology, I would say, looking at certifications in Azure, anything in that area and in that space, and all the specialities that you can study on, so you can do some of your baseline search in Azure, and you can focus in more specifically on identity, or if you want to focus on infrastructure as a service, or you want to specialize in email or whatever it is that you want to do. And the reason I say about Microsoft being quite authoritative in that space is because they're involved in everything, right? Even if you want to study and understand identity, it's going to cross paths with everything Microsoft does, because everything fundamentally has to be, authorized. It has to be, it goes through an identity service, right? So I would definitely suggest that would be a great starting place. And of course, Azure and identity services and Microsoft Azure, there's all the Microsoft services that run off the back of that. So additional technical services that will help you in other roles like Office 365. If you want to work in an IT provider, you're going to need to know how to use Office 365. Right? So they're really close knitted. So there are good skills that you can build upon. So if you have one of them, or two of them, or three of them, they'll serve you well no matter what you go to do. You're kind of learning principles and skills at the same time.
Yeah. Oh well, that's been a concept of of working in IT in the last couple of decades already. It's like things are constantly evolving and changing, and we go through this process of having to adapt and making sure that everything is just it's just right, so we understand it. But also, if I'm a business, I have to now understand the risk. Sometimes it's really, really, really hard for me to do because I don't know. The finer bits of we're moving to the cloud. So, Fede, in terms of moving stuff to the cloud, is there a good starting point that folks can go say, right, I want to move to the cloud, but here is the key things I need to do in terms of making sure we're safe. Now, there may be things like logging or whatever. So what's important?
First, I'd like to challenge what you just said there before, that people moving to the cloud might not understand the risks, and that's very hard. I think we need to differentiate between the operational risks of the technologies and the business risks. The business risks don't depend really on whether that company is running from on-prem or on the cloud, for example, right? So, and this is something I'm seeing a lot. People are maybe adopting cloud, maybe transitioning to cloud, and they're going, oh my God, we're going to be exposed to all these new risks. And you're going, no, wait, hold on. The risks are still the same. Are you at risk of, for example, reputational risks that you can't afford if something goes wrong? That was always the same, regardless of whether you're on-prem or on cloud. Can you afford being down for a couple of days if you have a cybersecurity incident? What would that cost to your customers? I think those business risks are where everything begins. And then what you do is you need to work back into, based on the technologies we're using, say, for example, we're in a transformation to cloud. Does our operational translation of those risks change? We had these collection of events that could happen to a certain degree of probability and that could have an impact in materializing those business risks. Does this fundamental change that we're doing in IT change that? And it will, right? You're right that it will. But the top level business risks shouldn't change. Your IT has nothing to do with that. I think a lot of people are getting the two confused. So separate the two would be my first advice. The risks that are bad days for your business are irrelevant to the technology that power them. The technology might then mean that some of those risks are at higher or lower probability of happening, but the risks themselves shouldn't change. Now we can go talk about the things that if you're moving to cloud, most companies are adopting cloud in some way or another, right? Some of them have gone full tilt and they have cloud only. Some of them are kind of shyly moving some things. Like, for example, Mark said, adopting Office 365. We find that that's one of the first things people adopt. Is very, very keen to not run their own Exchange services, and that's an easy thing to pick up on. And I think it's the same element, right? So you need to have the right advice and guidance provided by people that are dominant of that technology, so that they can help you translate the business risk into the operational risk of the technology you're choosing to adopt. That's where companies like you guys, like M3, like us, this is where we come in. We can be that catalyst to make sure that you're not moving blindly into a situation where you have unwillingly accepted a risk that you are not even acknowledging that you have in terms of operational risk. I mean, so you mentioned logging. Logging is a great example. Once you're in the cloud, once you're in your threat surface changes, and it'd be good to know that you're able to, at the very least, collect data about what's going on in there. Identities, to me, are essential. To me, if I can start with anything, I would start with identity, because it does become the key to your entire infrastructure and potentially your entire data structure. And then you have additional sophisticated controls, right, where you can start benefiting from some of the cloud coolness, some of the new toys that cloud is giving us. Like, for example, machine learning, and you have some really clever automation that is available today. So there's a lot to play with, but I wouldn't just go adopting them if I haven't been able to first understand my risks and what's the technology change doing to that risk.
Okay, so for me as and I'm playing the role of a client here, that that we are we have a traditional setup and we're needing to move across and so on. So and we're having to make all these big decisions. So there's a whole lot more metrics in there. So I think one of the key messages here is don't try and go it alone. Try and have somebody that can guide you all along. There are specific organizations that their sole thing is making sure that this transition from traditional to the cloud is a safe one, is an easy one. Easy comes in various degrees, but it's much easier than, as you said, we're not going to be down for a couple of days. We're not, we've taken all the precautions, that we possibly can, of taking things in consideration. Things that if I have a traditional system, probably never really thought about or used to doing myself. As you said, there's new cool automations and stuff that can go through and everything else. Now, part of the skills that both of you have now had to implement in this is what happens if something goes wrong. So, for example, suddenly we have an incident that kicks off. It may be malware, it may be an insider threat, it may be something. So if I can come to Ferdy first in terms of what would you expect to see like policy-wise or automation-wise from a security point of view, how we can sort of prepare for those kind of things?
I usually talk about this in terms of maturity curve, right? And you need to make an assessment as to where do you want to be in the maturity curve. You can go from you have nothing and you only find out about that incident because somebody told you that you've had an incident, like your customer, probably one of the worst examples you can have, all the way to a fully matured proactive threat hunting type environment where you're constantly looking for indicators that even something's beginning to happen, right? And there's a whole pendulum of options in between. If I had like a top 3 list of things to look for, to recommend for the early stages of that journey, I think logging is essential. We very often in our incident response capability come into organizations that have suffered a breach and they don't even have the shadows of logs, of audit trails that I can use to try to pull the pieces together, right? So logging as strong as possible logging mechanism would be ideal. And then the most important thing to combat, I think, is just a mentality change. We used to come from a world, particularly in that like early stage of the journey, right? You're in a world where people thought that they could invest enough money to defend themselves against this. So when you're walking into an incident, you're having to work through 20 years of corporate history that is asking the question, how could this happen at us? We've been spending all this money on these firewalls over here. And that is actually probably one of the things that is most disruptive during incident response, having to fight off the cultural challenge of acceptance. So if I could get good logs and a team that is willing to work with us in containment really quickly, because they understand exactly what risks they're trying to prevent. So they're going, look, we can be down for 24 hours, but no more, because that would affect the business. That would make our lives so much better. So good logs and a bit of an understanding of you were going to break breaches, what you do after that matters. It would be a fantastic start for any organization.
So Mark, given what Federico just said, in terms of you being the supplier of services and so on, should all MSPs be in that position that they provide all of those kind of services, in terms of like, I'm going to provide you logs, I'm going to provide this and everything else, so that makes it easier to investigate?
Yeah, Freddie, that was a great point that you made, by the way. Just to echo that, that's a contentious question, Carrie, because when it comes to, the short answer should be yeah. Of course, it should be yeah. But I think what it becomes, the reason that the state of affairs, for want of a better way to describe it, is that the IT budget is under incredible strain, right? We look at IT and look at cyber. How many organizations have a different budget for IT versus cyber, or does cyber get taken out of the IT budget, right? So that's the first thing. So organizations have this advent of the cloud, which is fantastic in many ways for lots of organizations. What it has done is it's stretched organizations' IT budgets already. So people feel like they're paying a lot more money to the MSP than they were before. The problem is the money is coming in one hand and right out the other, right? They associate the spend with some cloud services. Office 365, Azure, AWS, these are all classic ones. They put two and two together and think, well, I'm paying M3 a lot of money, but you're not really. M3 is collecting it, passing it on, and taking an unbelievably low margin for it, because that's how the cloud model works. So I think the problem is educating the customer first and foremost as to where their spend is going, and making them realise how little is going to some areas. So it's a realignment of perceptions to begin with. And then once MSPs can get beyond that point, then you can start having more sensible conversations about security and about, as Freddie said, you've got to get the basics in there, right? You go in to do incident response and you've got logs. That's going to be helpful, but I think I would add to that, and it's Cyber Essentials it's so simple, but it's so powerful, is the concept of a boundary of scope. The number of organizations that you go into and no one knows where things are. Like, oh, I didn't know we had this ingress or egress point. I didn't know we had that computer over there. I forgot about that server because we never touch it. Like, people forget about all sorts of stuff. So having in our space in IT, it's starting to be given a name. Call it VCIO. A bit like how we see vCISO becoming a thing in the cyberspace, but VCIO being an American term for IT strategy work. And it's about making the customer understand the overall, right, the whole thing, having a visibility of all of it.
I totally agree, Mark. The point is super powerful, and you're right? So we have some really great frameworks that are trying to drive those behaviors. The work National Cybersecurity Center did with Cyber Essentials was fantastic. And you were talking there about asset inventory. I mean, if I would trade 99% of everybody's investment in machine learning in order to put asset inventory done right and patching. If you did asset inventory right and patching and logging, you're giving us so much more powerful tools. The thing is, they're not sexy, right? So when you tell a company, even enterprise level, look, patching and asset inventory should be full-time roles. These are not tool things, solutions that you just get away with buying a tool. This should be a full-time role of people maintaining your asset awareness and patching and maintaining vulnerability management programs. But they just want to spend in the next unknown detection engine that is blockchain powered with a lot of machine learning. You're going, that's awesome. I love that your priority takes you there, but how about we focus on the real risks that have a higher chance of happening rather than red herring at the end?
Yeah, and this is, this is the point. We have to consider all these things. So we've had some questions from some of the people in the audience. So it should have popped up from Cara Mitchell. And she is asking, what extra knowledge might you be looking to bring into your teams over the next few years, i.e. AI, blockchain, or any new stuff that we want to be able to do?
Mark, you take it first. Yeah, go for it.
Brand, I guess, from a brand new perspective, it's going to be anything that's responding to the continual threat landscape evolving. Right, it's hard to say that we don't know what the next big thing's going to be. It's being aware of that, and I think especially when we talk about technology, I think in some ways we have almost all the technical tools that we can conceive right now. Right, I'm not saying, and that's not to say that someone can't come up with something else that's fantastic and it's going to be great, but I think, like, as this conversation's been going on, I think we need to stop and do some of the basics right first. If it's some of the basics that we have, like Freddie was just saying about asset inventory, vulnerability management, patching, these things would negate the need to continually evolve new technology all the time. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I think going back to some of the basics and some of the emerging things, right? Incident response is a big thing. There's not enough. It's just not enough of them. And in cyber, everyone is drawn much in the technology space to the sexy stuff. What about some of the actual stuff that really matters, right? Everyone wants to be a red team pen tester, right? They want to break everything. They don't. But what about the other side of it? So there's a lot of missing skills, and there's a lot of people that are missing the skills.
Federico?
Yeah, I was gonna add to, so we are lucky, right? We're a cybersecurity services firm, so we don't have to deal a lot with those basics. We don't do patching for customers. We don't do infrastructure management or anything like that. So we can get we're quite privileged in the type of work that we do, if you want. So in terms of new fields coming into us, I think there's an evolution of the current fields, and as we were saying, it's more about making sure that you have the right approach more than the technology. So we are working a lot with machine learning. We're working a lot with the ML models that Microsoft provides us. It'd be great to get more people that are not security, that are maybe more data-based, so data scientist type people involved in the conversation, because I think their approach to security is going to be totally different. And that is something you can extrapolate, right? So we have a fantastic team of incident responders. We have a fantastic team of pen testers. We have a fantastic blue team, great development teams. But what I would like to see more is the cross-pollination across disciplines. Whenever I bring somebody that knows about psychology, they have a dramatical positive impact to the quality of our social engineering. When I bring somebody with marketing experience or design experience, they have a dramatic performance in our phishing campaigns. And I think that lateral thinking, as we grow as a company and we're able to afford the luxury of that, I think it's something that I'm really looking forward to. So, and it happened the same when we bring people from the forces and the armed services. They come with all the standard operating procedure, the mentality about process, the governance, which in an incident is essential. So the fact that they don't know how to run Bloodhound, maybe I can teach that in 3 seconds, but what we really look for is those skills that are transferable from fields that have nothing to do with cyber. Because I think that's where the biggest value potential is.
Okay, yeah, and and that's very, 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 very true because transferable skills are super important and so on. And this is a topic we've covered throughout this particular week. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on, and this is really, really, really important as well, is that we are working in very, very dynamic environments. Things can go from 0 to a million miles an hour in a split second. Things can go dramatically wrong. Things can go really right. But generally, there is some fire and stuff to put out somewhere almost all the time. So
I don't know what you mean, Kerry. We've never been in that
okay,
situation.
yeah, okay, you're very well organized, but
Quite.
so now- and it's like, what is your take on the mental health of staff? I mean, it's they're often challenged with a very complex topic that needs a lot of thought and process, or it's a brand new thing that they need to figure out, and they need to really figure out fast. The hours can be very, very long. How do you think we should approach this sort of anti-burnout um, thing that we often see within IT? So, Mark.
Um, yeah, it's that's a great question, Gary. I think it's stressful. There's no doubt. Maybe when it comes to looking after the mental health of people, I think that organisations, I guess the IT being and in the current landscape, the poor relation to cyber, there's not as much money there, right? There's not as much money being spent, and so the pressure is continually on trying to get more and more out for less and less, or at least more and more for the same. When there's a constant budget constraint, and human beings and the engineers who look after them seem to be the ones who suffer. I would say that in terms of avoiding burnout, I think organisations, they need to have depth, right? You can't. We're gone. Well, the days were gone long ago. But there's if anyone was in doubt, there shouldn't be any more. That one single person can't possibly know everything, and even a one man show can't know everything. They can only know a little bit of it, and we need to be working in teams, right? Realizing that different people have different skill sets and helping one another and managing that better and managing customers' expectations too, right? I always talk about IT, and we use IT in a broad sense, that it's become like a utility. As much as you switch the light on, or turn your heating on, you just expect it to come on. People expect IT like that, but the problem is it's not legislated that way. It's not governed that way. There's not as much money involved in it, but the expectation is still the same in that it's got to work, and it's just so fundamental. So that when it doesn't work, the stress it skyrockets really quick, like you say, Kenny, and these expectations need to be redrawn with people so that they understand, and that really impacts stress of anyone working in IT. Now, I'm not saying the fun about the cyber because I'm sure Freddie will add a lot more to
No,
the
I think you're
stress.
spot on. Mark, you're spot on, and I was actually quite keen to jump when Kerry asked you before about what did COVID mean in terms of skills or tools that you're using to manage. I think it's a fantastic example of how every organization has had to develop new, if you didn't have them before, but even if you had them, you had to stress them and put them under a lot of consideration, how we treat our people. Ultimately, we are a people business. You said it before. What the only resource that we really have to do our work is people. So you need to take care of them. Not only because it's a financial need, but it's also the right thing to do. It's the only way you're going to grow a team is if you actually treat them well. So there's an obligation on organizations to realize that it's on us to provide the tools for people to manage their own resilience. We need to give them the training. We're unfortunately at a society that hasn't equipped the adults to deal with resilience, with mental resilience. Most of us have never had that. I'm seeing my kids go through school, and school is now teaching them breathing and meditation and self-awareness, tools that I learned as an adult because I went and seeked out them. I was interested in yoga and I learned those techniques. That needs to become a lot more commonplace, and it needs to be part of learning to write and learning to speak. It has to be to learn to take care of our mental resilience. In the meantime, we as a corporate have the obligation to skill up in the same way that you send people to Cisco training or SANS training to skill up on the technical resources. We need to skill up our workforce on how to take care of themselves. We can't just expect them to be okay, no matter how much workload we chuck at them. That is completely unrealistic and unfair, especially under stress conditions like COVID-19 that's put everyone, no matter whether you were living alone or you had kids or you were living with a partner, we're all under circumstances that nobody had designed for. So and if you then add on top of that the cybersecurity industry, which is by its very nature reactive to emergencies, and there's an acceptance that needs to happen that is also the work, right? So this is not a 9-to-5 job. It never will be. You can play with other levers in order to compensate for that. For example, we have unlimited holidays. So we acknowledge that some days are long, so you can take as much holiday as you want after that. And these are small improvements that you can make in order to try to balance the equation out better. So Mark is totally right. There's an expectation that the job is not an office job, but we as corporates have an obligation to do better and equip the teams with better tools to respond to this.
Wow, that's really super. And and this is the thing that it's breaking the traditional business model quite a lot. In terms of there's a lot more things that we have to prepare and a lot more things that we have to evolve to help our employees and so on. Because quite a lot of employees and a lot of roles that come up nowadays are all remote roles. So you don't probably see your colleagues, don't meet them. You may have been working together for maybe 6 months or even more, but never met them. You've never met your boss. You never, or the boss have never met any of his other colleagues or employees and so on. So it must be really, really, really difficult thing for everybody to do. And I think it's important that we take out these times to say, guys, you need to look after yourself. Everything is not just about performance, because if you try and push yourself too hard, you're going to stress and you're going to be too tired, and it's not going to work for everybody.
I think there's some really key small techniques that also we can start codifying as an arsenal of tools, right? One of the principles that we operated is over communicate. The distance is implying that people are only communicate at functional level. You will have a meeting about a subject. You will talk to somebody about an ask or a need. And nobody's talking about all the other social stuff that we used to talk to if you were lucky enough to be in an office before. So one of the rules of thumb that we're trying to apply is over communicate. Talk about everything, talk about 3 times more than you would have normally, because we're missing that casual interaction. And then there's small things that the people like us who are in positions of a certain amount of leadership or management, you need to reach out to people individually, because the conversations you used to have are not happening anymore. So the best thing you can do is a big chunk of our time has to be spent triggering those conversations and just catching up with it. Hey, how you doing? You okay? How's things at home? And a 10-minute conversation like that can do more for the mental health of your team than even the extra holidays.
Yeah. Sorry, Mark, did you want to say something?
I was going to say that what Freddie was talking about with looking after people in the unlimited holidays, and your point about looking after people's mental health, and went back to what Freddie just said. It's the way that we work. It's ironic that the method of working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, occasional breaks, it doesn't work. It wasn't designed for people working in digital worlds, working in long hours, looking at screens, constantly working with their mind rather than working with their hands. Right? There's a different approach is needed, and it's not surprising that human beings you can't take that method and apply that to working them in an entirely different environment. Right? And to the point Freddie made about stopping and asking people if they're okay, absolutely, and particularly the ones who you think are okay. Those are the ones that I think you need to focus on the most, right? The ones that you think they're all right. They're probably the ones, just because they're holding it together doesn't mean they're all right. And you ask them how things are, and they tell you. And I think it's also important that you be persistent there, because sometimes people aren't just going to tell you right away. They need to know that you're going to continue. And then the way that you respond to that when they tell you how things are, that you're going to take it sincerely and that you're going to do something about it. Right? If they think that it falls on deaf ears, they're just not going to tell you again, and you break that trust. So, really important points.
I love that point that you made there on, and it's absolutely true, right? So the modern world is not geared for the 9 to 5 simply because of design. It was designed for a different time. And I think it also makes sense as to how we can do better. Digital work, cybersecurity work, for example, 24/7 cybersecurity work that we only do. You don't need to be doing the 8 hours continuously, for example. So we have people, me, myself, today I woke up at 4 a.m. in the morning, did 2 hours of work, went for a run, took my kids to school, came back, and started a second batch of my day. That's a configuration that works better for me today. And I'll change that configuration tomorrow. The freedom we have to configure our lives around our work and our work around our lives is a benefit. But there's a huge responsibility that comes with that as well, that we do that not at the sacrifice of ourselves. And that's the tricky. I see juniors really suffering with that freedom. People that are less experienced think that they need to do all the hours. And we, I think, as managers, as leaders, have an obligation to say the freedom of being able to work dynamically doesn't mean an obligation to work all the time. And a lot of the times, I think the most experienced people are usually more comfortable with the, hey, great, so I get to configure my day however I want as long as the job gets done. Juniors interpret that as an obligation to be online whenever the boss is. And I think that's something that we really need to focus on. We can't ignore it.
Okay, so talking about working hours and so on. So we're living in a global community, and there are skills from all over the world. Do you think we should embrace people from other countries that may be in a different time zone, perhaps, maybe even different languages and so on, cultures and so on? Should we actively seek out and include them in our current mix?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think diversity, right, it adds so much to everyone who gets to be a part of it and understand different cultures, other ways of thinking, other ways of approaching things. Also, from a social perspective as well, it adds a lot. It actually helps to develop, social sort of bonds. You think about the social fabric of your organization and the way that people, building that culture around those values. It's ironic, right? But how many people go on holiday in the UK versus wanting to go abroad? Why do they do that? Yeah, maybe it's for the weather, but it's for more than that. It's the culture, and it's different things. And why wouldn't we want to bring that into our organizations and experience that on the day to day, rather than whenever we go away?
You're asking an immigrant myself, so I think that the answer is pretty obvious. Yes, absolutely, you should. Not only it's a self-serving answer, I wouldn't be here if that wasn't possible. Carrie, I'm looking at you as well. But so I think beyond that, I think there is and Mark's points are absolutely true. I mean, the healthier, the mix leads to a healthier organization, and absolutely yes. I think that even if you looked at it from a purely capitalistic perspective, at least in cyber, there's a straight-through strategic benefit to diversity. The more different minds you have, the different perspectives you're going to be able to look at a situation with. And you're going to avoid echo chambers that might prevent you from seeing something that is blindly obvious. But simply if you're tackling it with the same optics all the time, you're going to be missing. Whether that is around innovation or about the paths of an attack, the diversity adds an absolute strategic benefit to the capabilities of a cybersecurity organization, simply because it gives you a different way of looking at things. So you don't even need to be morally aligned with this. Even if you just want to look at hard cold dollars, there's a financial benefit to diversity that I think usually gets ignored. It's not the only benefit, but there's a measurable benefit there that I think is important.
Yeah.
Really,
you see it as well. You see it in cultural stuff as well, Carrie. When you look at design, look at any of the creative arts, right? Where does the new designs or creative things come from? They come from the merging of cultures, the merging of different things. And it's like what Freddie said, that you can take that and put it into business, merge different ways of thinking to solve harder problems, more complex problems, and more creative in the way that you address them.
Yeah, and I think Freddie touched on it earlier on as well. people with different skills, different backgrounds, from marketing to psychology to technical backgrounds. When you're working on a specific project, you'll see a different kind of output that we sometimes, as technical persons, are completely blind to. It's something that we've never thought about. Of doing like creating an email, but creating a really good email. You need a marketing mind for things like that. Um, Technical people like us typically suck at writing these kind of things, because they're quite complex, and we tend to write quite technically complex things, but the marketing stuff is just as complex, because it that takes in the whole psyche of the person that's reading it or communicating the whole the concept of the message that's going forward. Now we're rapidly coming towards the end of our hour already, and I was like, wow, okay. So the main thing that I think I've started to take away from this, that we need to come back to the basics, right? So we need to approach our way forward using the basics. We have to embrace any changes and new technologies that have that is emerging and coming on. We need to embrace that we are going to have to work in teams. We have to partner up with somebody else that is going to do something different to us, or different than me, but helping me in doing their thing, or I may be helping somebody else achieving their company goals or their things. And I think over the last couple of years, when we've worked on things like Cyber Essentials and going forward in that, it's getting down to the basics. Have we done our foundations right? Have we created a platform that we can continually improve on? Because the things are moving so fast forward that we have to keep on top of it. And yes, we need new talent, but we need also the old guys like us that have been in the game a long time. We've seen many waves of a lot of technologies emerging, suddenly technologies vanishing. Things like in the 1990s, we saw Novell being a major player, and then sort of in the 2000s, gone. We've seen massive companies like Netscape absolutely dominating the internet in the 1990s. It doesn't exist now. So it is constantly changing thing, and we all need to adapt and manage that. And we have to try and encourage our career changers and our career starters, I think, to know the fact is, I don't have to be good at everything. I just have to be good at some things, because there will be people that are good at other stuff as well. So as just as a final round, what would be your advice for, say, university leavers be? What would their next steps be to look at? Not necessarily working at organizations like yourself, but what steps do they need to take on their continuous development forward in skills and so on? Anyone can go first.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first on that one. So I think there's a lot of tools focusing on cyber, right? There's a lot of tools available out there. And what I would focus is on try to understand how you like to learn best. Because the worst thing you can do is try to insist on a path that just doesn't work for you, simply because it's the one that you saw me follow, or Mark, or Stu Hurst, or Harry, or whoever it is that you're emulating, because they present to you an example. I think you really need to understand how you'd like to work. Some people are visual, so there's a heck of a lot of online content where you can go learn. Some people like to learn by doing. Go to a hack lab. There's some really great hack labs around that you can go learn in teams. If anything, join a community. Scotland is particularly privileged, as the reason I'm here as a business is in Scotland is because the community is incredibly healthy. We help each other, and there's a massive support network for people in the entire spectrum of capability and even psychological makeup. So the Cyber Scotland Connect community, for example, takes everyone, welcomes everyone. It's a great place to know people and get ideas as to the different ways of and paths of development. So my only advice would be don't try to solve it all by yourself. There's a whole universe of people there willing to help, people that you can partner with in order to learn together, people looking for jobs or volunteers or apprenticeships. There's a million different ways to attack this problem. Don't just work with the ones that you've seen. Try to go to the community and check out what else is out there and get involved. Even if it's speaking or attending, there's a ton of really amazing people out there supporting everyone, particularly at this stage, the newcomers to the industry. So don't go at it alone. As you said, Zelda was right. All these years alone. There's no need to go at it alone.
Excellent. Mark?
I would, of course, echo everything that Federico said. To add anything different to that, I would say think about your value to an organisation not directly associated with your skills, your technical skills or your qualifications. Sit and write down what you're good at, and it can be basic. Are you good at communicating? Are you good at problem solving? What are the other skills that you can offer people? You write down the things that you're good at and the things that you're not. Of course, you want to work on the things that you aren't, but the things that you're positive, make sure that you're getting that into your CV. Make sure that you're putting that across in interviews, and make sure that you're making whoever you're trying to interview with understand that there's more to you than simply thinking that every job's the same, every organisation's the same. You've got a lot that you can bring, and as Freddie said, all we have is people, right? And if you think that people are hiring you because of your skills alone, then you're misled. Right? There's so much more to it than that, and I just wish that we see more of those people. And I think people just aren't really taught those skills or taught those values of themselves the way that they need to be and put them across. So I would definitely focus on that.
Okay, well, and those are fantastic and excellent points, and and I really couldn't agree more. In going forward, because we can provide advice, we can give information, we can do stuff, and so on, and and the rest is up to you. So if you looking for a job or looking to start somewhere else and so on, the answer is you. Join the communities, as Ferry said. Great help, great mentors, always somebody to help. And we are super fortunate in Scotland that we have such a community that that meets very regular and so on. And I want to thank both of you for giving up your time today just to join us for this hour. And honestly, I think this week has been a fantastic week. We've seen lots and lots of presentations from different folks, different points of views, different backgrounds, different everything. But this is the diversity that cyber brings, and this is the diversity that Scotland brings, and we couldn't be more grateful for things like this. So thank you both. I hope you have a fantastic afternoon and a wonderful weekend ahead. So, okay, guys.
You too, sir.
Thanks.
Good to see you, Mark.
Cheers.
An absolute pleasure.
Okay.
Take care.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.